again, everybody. It's time for the Silver Bullets podcast. Once again, I am Michael Citro.
And I'm Chip Minnich.
Chip, the Buckeyes took on the Indiana Hoosiers this week. This one was, I think before the season we had this pegged as maybe a difficult game. Certainly didn't think it was going to be maybe the most important game of the season in terms of the Big Ten Eastern Division race. But that's the way the season has unfolded with the way Michigan and Penn State have folded. And, this was a big game. And it kind of started the way that we would have expected. Ohio State and Indiana in a bit of a tussle early. And then Ohio State starts to pull away. And you figure, okay, then, normalcy prevails. But then Ohio State started busting in coverage all over the field in the second half, and that allowed Indiana to get some big plays, get back into it, and ultimately a little bit of a nervier finish than we would have liked, but it's still a Buckeye victory. I didn't really feel... I'm always one of those that if you're ahead in the fourth quarter against a team, that team has to prove that they can tie the game before I start to get too nervous. So they didn't do that. So ultimately, I feel like Ohio State probably had it covered, even if they had to press a little bit at the end.
Well, it's certainly obviously very impressed with Indiana. I think they completely justified their ranking. I think anyone who was underestimating Indiana now has a greater appreciation of the job that Tom Allen is doing with the Hoosiers. And you and I, we've talked about how long we've watched Ohio State football over the years. And just speaking for myself, this is one of these games where I'm certainly happy that Ohio State won. I never doubted that Ohio State would win. But it's one of these rare games where coming out of the win, it left me with a lot of questions rather than a conclusive feeling of certainty about the team as a whole. There are certainly questions about the performance of the defense, most certainly within the secondary, and I know we're going to talk about that tonight.
Yeah, and I agree with you, and even I'll take it one step further. It's got me concerned, not maybe concerned's too strong of a word. It's got me a little bit interested in how this defense is going to be under Kerry Combs. The jury is still out on Kerry Combs. He comes in without having called a defense, without having been the defensive coordinator. It's a big job. I mean, he's coached at the NFL level, but it's a totally different thing to be a secondary coach and then step into being the man and being the defensive coordinator. So I think there's a lot for him to do, but I think there's also a learning curve that hopefully he will be able to figure out. And his seat might be warming up a little bit if some of these coverage busts don't get fixed, because it looked like in a lot of these situations it was just simply a player biting on a play fake a little hard, or some miscommunication about the coverage. And I saw I don't know if you saw this, I can't remember the person who put it together. Someone put together a series of videos showing a lot of this was Marcus Hooker having some issues. And, we knew that there were going to be issues in the secondary this year, some new starters, some new faces. But, it all looks very correctable.
Well, I certainly agree with you that I know what the videos you're referring to. And during the course of the game, I had made those comments that Marcus Hooker on multiple occasions was out of position in terms of, like you said, coming up to in what he thought was maybe run support, or, where he thought his coverage responsibilities were. And I know that we'll talk about it during the course of the podcast. To paraphrase Coach Day, that they being Ohio State, the coaches are going to look at the scheme, the personnel, and the coaching. And I'm not sure in terms of what order. I have my thoughts about what would be an appropriate course of action. As far as Kerry Combs, I think, let's not. I guess speaking for myself, I think, yeah, he's certainly going to be hearing it on the, in the coaches' meetings. He's certainly hearing it on the internet message boards. But I think Kerry Combs, I think there's certainly not a ton of time because we're unfortunately getting closer and closer towards the end of the season. I mean, since it's been abbreviated. So whatever kind of course corrections are made, let's hope that they make them not only against Illinois, but that they are sustainable for the remainder of the 2020 season.
Yeah, let's get into the game a little bit. The game started off, it was 7-0 after the first quarter. Very easy start for Ohio State. Garrett Wilson, 10-yard pass, a very simple drive, and you always kind of get a little worried when it's as easy as that to start a game. But it should have been more than 7-0 after the first quarter, Chip. I mean, there was I don't know if you saw this differently. Maybe my eyes are a little too old now. But it certainly appeared very obvious that Whop Philyor fumbled a football after he caught it after a big hit by Baron Browning. It looked like there was plenty of time. Indiana didn't rush up and hurry their next play. No whistle came. There was no replay. Nobody from the Ohio State sideline called timeout and asked him to look at it. And that was going to give Ohio State the ball right back in excellent field position. So that was one of a few pretty curious calls for me in that game.
I agree. The Whop Philyor fumble and the lack thereof by the coaching staff to challenge it. I was incredulous that nobody in the Ohio State press box, in the coach's box, I should say, didn't signal down to Coach Day to challenge that, because it certainly looked like a fumble to me.
It appeared to be pretty obvious. I believe the announcers, Gus Johnson and Joel Klatt, I believe, were saying, "Oh, I expect this play will be stopped and it'll be overturned," and then they got the snap off, and it was, you almost wonder, do they want to challenge it because they had to take a timeout 5 seconds into the game, and maybe didn't want to, somehow lose the challenge and lose the second timeout, early in the first quarter. But that was a big play, and I think that there were a few situations in the first half that kept Ohio State from taking a bigger lead and maybe just demoralizing Indiana to the point where they're like, okay, yeah, they're putting it on us again. Not that I think that Tom Allen's team is a team that quits, because he doesn't quit, but I think there is a point where, eventually this game got to 35-7. If it had been 49-7, maybe the Hoosiers are looking at some other players. Maybe they're not really. Maybe they're saying, okay, well, we need to just start working on some fundamentals and try some things, and forget the game plan, forget trying to win the game. And that kind of does happen in football. So, I think that some of this let Indiana hang around a little bit, and that was the first big one.
Yeah, hopefully that'll be something that they will address. Ryan Day and the coaches will, maybe at the Ryan Day press conference, somebody will bring that up. Coach, did you ever contemplate challenging that? Because I think you raised a very good point. Maybe it was a concern over losing the timeout, but it certainly could have been a substantial momentum changer if Ohio State had challenged that play, had been given the ball, and had come away with some even more points in the first half.
Yeah, and the other part of that too is that if you're sitting upstairs, you're thinking, yeah, we don't need to challenge this because they're definitely going to blow the whistle. They're definitely going to look at this, because looking at that replay, there's no way you wouldn't think that would get at least a second look, and it didn't get a second look. So, and I wasn't impressed with the officiating crew, and I don't think that this was a close game because of the officiating, but I think it could have been a lot more comfortable if the officiating had been a little bit better and more consistent in this game. That kind of had a big impact in the game, because even though Ohio State got the ball back after that non replay and an overturn, that led to Justin Fields' first of 3 interceptions, his first 3 interceptions of the season. So, Justin was a little careless with the ball in this game, a little more than we're used to. Trying to make some plays when there's no real play to be made, when he just needs to play safe sometimes. He's, I think, a player who, because of his feet, because of his athletic ability, is always going to hold on to the ball longer than you would like and take some sacks that he shouldn't take. But some of these plays that, through the interception, one of them he's hit and he's going down, and he sees his man, and you see what he's trying to do there. But at that point, live to play another day. Justin will look at this film and he'll be coached up by Ryan Day, and I have absolutely zero concerns about this being an ongoing problem.
I would say that out of Justin Fields' relatively short Ohio State career, without question, this was the worst game that he's played. And the interceptions, certainly, you could look at that, because, last year, he was, so careful with the ball, and this season up until this past game against Indiana. But like you said, I think just I can live with interceptions, but some of his decision making was, I wouldn't even say it was highly questionable. I mean, it just made you wonder what were you thinking? I can only speculate that Coach Day in the meetings with Justin is going to really drill into him about, being careful, and not only being careful, but, to not force the issue. And it certainly seemed like that was what Justin Fields was doing on Saturday.
Yeah. And like I said, I don't have too many concerns about this being an ongoing problem. I think he'll be okay. He's shown it in the past that he's been okay, on these kind of things. And he hasn't made these types of decisions. Sometimes as a quarterback, especially a young quarterback, you stop doing the little things and it gets you in trouble. Stop looking off the safety. Stop maybe throwing a pump fake. There were a couple times when he seemed to have hands up in his face and he didn't just slide a little bit to clear himself for a passing lane and got the ball knocked down. And credit to Indiana, they did a lot of things to try to disrupt him. They brought some late blitzes a lot. They did some things on the defensive line that confused, some of the Ohio State offensive linemen. But in the end, Ohio State put up 600 yards of offense. So you could look at Justin Fields' worst game as a Buckeye, and they still got 600 yards of offense. So really, how bad was it?
Oh, it was no. I don't want to, I don't want people to be busting out the torches and pitchforks for this. I just simply think, like you said, there were some, poor throws. As I said a moment ago, I think trying to force plays that weren't there, and let's all hope that he's going to learn from it for not only this upcoming game against Illinois, but going forward.
Yeah, and I wasn't trying to put that on you either. I was just pointing out that we're a little bit spoiled, and when we see a team and we're able to criticize them and then go, yeah, but they got 600 yards of offense. So let me ask you about this officiating call. This one was deemed after replay to be confirmed, not stands, but confirmed. Zach Harrison hit Michael Penix, in my mind, before his hand started moving forward. Ball started wobbling already before his hand was coming forward. He had the empty hand situation as his arm came forward without the ball. Ohio State jumps on it, but they ruled it incomplete on the field. They didn't overturn it, and in fact confirmed it. Did you see this play differently than I did?
No, I saw it precisely the same way as you. I thought when it happened live, it certainly looked to me like that was a fumble, but unfortunately the officials on the field did not see it the same way.
This crew did not cover itself in glory. There was a drive that stalled because of a personal foul on Wyatt Davis, which was essentially a push after the whistle. But on that entire play, the defender's hand was jammed up into Wyatt Davis's face mask for like a good 7 seconds, and that didn't get flagged. So, I mean, there were some curious calls in this game, and again, I don't think there's any conspiracy here. I would much rather blame it on incompetence than conspiracy. But how did you see that play? Do you remember that one?
No, I certainly do, and I'm a big fan of Wyatt Davis because of his aggressive nature, and I will merely I agree with you that it seemed very curious that the officials did not see what led to Wyatt Davis retaliating, so to speak. If anything, it's just that old adage about how they always get the second guy, and it's rather unfortunate because the one thing I would never want to take away from Wyatt Davis in terms of just his approach to the game is that aggressive mindset that he has. So that was, again, I saw it the same way that you did, that the officials for them to penalize Wyatt Davis yet completely ignore or disregard what led to that was very puzzling.
Right. I mean, you have referees whose job it is to watch offensive line play. And to watch, that's the guy, the umpire, when you see the flag come out in the middle of the field and you go, oh, no, it's holding. Because, 99 times, maybe 98, 97 times out of 100, it is holding. But the other couple times that it's not, out of that 100, it's hands to the face, right? So.
Oh, yeah. I mean, absolutely.
So, it's curious that it went on that long and wasn't seen. And I don't necessarily have a problem with throwing the flag on Davis there, but that's, at worst, that's offsetting calls. So you don't lose the 10 yards, you do it over again, and you see what happens. But that definitely stalled the drive. So it was a tough slog in the first half for Ohio State, not just because of what Indiana was doing defensively, which was very good, but also, they really weren't getting the benefit of anything officiating wise in terms of, I don't mean getting helped. I mean, they just got hurt by some of these decisions. So, and again, you let a team like Indiana hang around and they start believing that they can win and they start making some big plays and they start believing even more. And in a season, Chip, when we don't have fans in the stands to kind of generate atmosphere and excitement, it's on the players to do that themselves. And I think without the fans in the stands, it's easier even for a team like Indiana. And I think Ryan Day talked about this in the lead up to the game. It's easier for a team that has belief to make plays in that situation. They're not you don't have the crowd getting loud and crazy, toward the end of the game when the defense is on the field and making life miserable for the opposing quarterback to, be heard and all of that stuff. I do think that played a role.
Yeah, it was unfortunate. It was late in the week when it was announced that not even the players' parents or the coaches' families would be allowed in the stands. So, as you said, in a common or a traditional setting, Ohio Stadium would have been rocking and making it much more difficult on Indiana to be able to perform at the high level that they did on Saturday. But want to give Indiana credit for a lot of the things that they did on both sides of the ball, because, as you said, that power of belief was there, throughout the entire game, and they had no quit.
Absolutely. So let's go on to the second quarter, where early in the second quarter, Whop Philyor catches a 4-yard touchdown pass from Michael Penix and ties the game 7-7. This one he did not fumble, so there was no reason to replay this one. And it's 7-7 at this point. And then Ohio State runs off 21 points to end the half. We found a running game, Chip. Master Teague finally hits a home run in the run game, 41-yard touchdown run. He added a 2-yard touchdown run, and Justin Fields added a 9-yard touchdown run as the running game got going. And I think this was punishment specifically for me for changing my pick to click offensively from Master Teague, who I had in against Maryland, and I didn't keep him in there for Indiana.
I don't know about any kind of punishment. I'm gonna defer to the fact that Master Teague and Trey Sermon. I know we haven't talked about it. Like you said, the Ohio State running game was probably the most effective that they have been in this season, and hopefully it's a sign of things to come. When we start talking about Illinois and the remaining games on the schedule. And, for me, I think the fact that Ohio State was able to, they were kind of, like you said, they were kind of in a slog with Indiana at the beginning of the second quarter. But then when they finished it, I mean, like you said, it just seemed like the momentum was solidly on Ohio State's side. Even the halftime announcers were saying that's what's so difficult about a team like Ohio State. Like, it was 7-7, and the next thing you know, Ohio State rattled off 21 points to make it 28-7 at the half.
Indeed, and then it even continued into the second half as Garrett Wilson caught a 9-yard touchdown pass to make it 35-7. And at this point, you're thinking maybe we're a touchdown away from seeing some backups in the game. And Indiana had other ideas. Ty Freifogel had an enormous game, but specifically in the second half, a 63-yard touchdown pass, to get back to 35-14, then a 33-yard touchdown pass to Freifogel to make it 35-21. Ohio State had some trouble protecting. Again, Justin holding on to the ball too long. I think there were some issues with some of the play calling in the second half at times. Finally, Shaun Wade makes one of those plays we expected Shaun Wade to make. 36-yard pick six to make it 42-21, and you're thinking, okay, this game's over, done and dusted. But no, David Ellis, who also had a big game, caught a 16-yard touchdown pass to make it 42-28, and then Freifogel 56 more yards. Ty Freifogel having the game of his life makes it 42-35, and so one touchdown game, still 10:26 to play, and Ohio State had some nice drives, but couldn't put anything additional on the board. There was a missed field goal. There was a decision to go for a fourth down when they were close, and a field goal would have been fairly easy from that point, but they decided to go for it, didn't get it. So they let Indiana kind of hang around, but the defense did rise up, over that last 8 minutes or so and did the job. And it ended 42-35. Everybody take a deep breath.
Well, a few things to unpack there. And like you said, when it got to be 35-7, I know a name from the past that you'll recognize, somebody that I follow on Twitter. I'm not sure if you do, but Von Brodnax on Twitter tweeted out like, "Hey, maybe we're going to start to." I can't remember exactly how he phrased it, but like some of the backups, and it seemed almost as soon as he sent that tweet that the next thing you know, it's like, nope, like that's not happening, because as you said, that Indiana comeback, as I said a few moments ago, there was no quit in Indiana, which is a testament to the coaches and players for the kind of program that they have built and are building there. As far as Shaun Wade, I want to give him credit for, from what I understand, that interception that was returned for a touchdown that was based on film studies. So it does kind of prove the point that, yes, doing some intensive scouting, that, it does pay off. Unfortunately, Shaun Wade also was being victimized, by Freifogel, that 56-yard touchdown pass. That was, he was a pass interference call that Indiana declined because they had the touchdown anyway. And a very key point, I think, to point out on that fourth down play that I didn't notice at the time, it wasn't until well after the game had been decided in Ohio State's favor, is that on that play, on that fourth down play that Ohio State attempted, Justin Fields, the pass that was incomplete, was the victim of a targeting call that was not called. And we were talking earlier about the officials not bathing themselves in glory. This was something that I know Teddy Greenstein, who up until recently was a longtime sports reporter for the Chicago Tribune. He tweeted out it in slow motion saying, "How was this not called?" And, when I think about, the way that, Ohio State, like you said, they could have gone for the field goal. Here's just kind of like an open question to you, is that, when we think about all of the talented players that Ohio State signed, I guess, just speaking for myself, when you think about the fact that, a number of those freshmen were playing like, we saw, briefly, Julian Fleming and, Jackson Smith and Jigba. And, but who would have guessed that, Jake Siebert, as a place kicker, he had a missed field goal, which is unfortunate. But he's been truly a starter, in the fact that Blake Hobbiel is still not playing. So a win's a win. A lot of, like I said at the onset, a lot of questions that came out of this win. As Coach Meyer would like to used to say, I'm going to paraphrase, like the best thing about being like 3-0 is like the fact that they're now 4-0. So congratulations to Indiana. I think they're going to make a lot of noise down the stretch. I think that Indiana, we don't know yet because the 2021 Big Ten schedule is kind of in flux. From what I understand, it's going to be completely redone. But my hunch is when Ohio State, when they do go to Indiana, that might be, as you might refer to, a big nude Saturday game next season.
Yeah, and if I think these things in college football, things kind of come and go in cycles. I expect Indiana to kind of stay at the level they're at, or maybe rise slightly higher. But I definitely think Ohio State has some steps forward that it can take in the future. They may suffer when Justin Fields leaves at quarterback a little, but I think their next quarterback will be good as well. And I think that when that secondary is right, this is a very good defense and a very good team. And I don't think the secondary is right yet. But again, I think I saw a lot of correctable mistakes from the film that I saw. It just comes down to can they correct them? And that's up to the coaches and the players that are selected to play. And if they can, then they can be as good as the Alabamas and Clemsons. And if they can't, I think they're a solid 4th to 5th best team in the country. I don't think that they can challenge Alabama and Clemson playing the way they're playing defensively.
I completely agree with that statement. I don't think the way that they're playing defensively, they would be able to keep pace with Clemson or Alabama. I certainly think that they're still a playoff team. Don't get me wrong. I'm not bad mouthing that. As far as the defensive performance, we were talking about Coach Combs, and I mentioned earlier, some of the things that Coach Day had said about the scheme and the personnel and the coaching. I want to give credit to Bill Bank Green, who brought this. He made this point on the Buckeye on the morning scoop with Tom Orr. Something along the lines of when we were talking about the scheme and the personnel and the coaching, is that Ohio State the defensive backs are still playing the scheme that Jeff Hafley implemented last year, and that's not a bad thing. It's just that it's a complicated and a more difficult scheme. And the reason I'm alluding to what Bill Bank Green said is it might be, like a combination of not only the scheme and but also the personnel. And the reason why I'm bringing that is, all right, so you're talking about a complex scheme. We've talked about it on this podcast and other people, but don't forget they lost 2 first-round corners and a very, very solid underrated safety in Jordan Fuller. Right. So it might be better. This is just a thought that Bank said that I completely concur with is, and I think this is where, like when the throwing in the coaching aspect is, I think Coach Combs probably would feel more comfortable playing what Bank was advocating. What I think would make more sense is that more of like that Tampa 2 with 2 safeties back, playing more zone coverage, because if you did that, now granted, I think, like the corners are now they're not nearly as talented as they were last year. And I think an underrated aspect of something that's affecting Ohio State is the fact that they lost Cameron Brown to injury. So you're talking about you were already positioned. You were inexperienced. Now your depth has been substantially impacted. So I think if they were to adjust the scheme into something that the players may be better suited for, that I think that Coach Combs would probably feel more comfortable coaching. And I'm not here to suggest like I know that like the idea of with Sean Wade that he came back to play that outside corner, whereas last season he played on that inside role. That maybe he still plays that outside corner. You have Seven Banks. You bring in Marcus Williamson as for example, like that nickel corner, but maybe playing. I don't know if Marcus Hooker and Josh Proctor, if you want to play them back in those deeper safety roles, that might help a lot. I think it might just kind of calm everyone down in terms of playing something that might be simpler for the players to execute and something that Coach Combs may feel better. I would think that he has more experience coaching in that style than something that Coach Hafley constructed last season.
Yeah, you touched on the one name that I was talking to Tony Gerdeman on Twitter in private messages Saturday night about this, is that this is what it looks like after Jordan Fuller. People didn't really give Jordan Fuller his due. As good as he was, the reason Jeff Hafley's defense worked as well as it did is because you had Jordan Fuller. He cleaned up a lot of messes and put out a lot of fires that they just don't have the experience currently at the position to do. And maybe they won't until they, find the next Jordan Fuller. But Jordan Fuller, much better player than people gave him credit for. It was not a surprise to me that he earned a starting role for the Rams and has become an important player, even though he wasn't drafted very high. He's just the kind of player that has always done well and has always been overlooked.
And I agree completely. Yeah, Jordan Fuller, the underappreciated aspect of his game. I think when I look at Marcus Hooker and Josh Proctor, I see a lot of potential. But I think like when I think of like Josh Proctor, I love that hit earlier in the game that. I think people were saying, Josh Proctor, might be charged with murder. Yeah. It was somewhere the late great Jack Tatum was smiling. That was something where I said to my wife, if I got hit like that, like I'd still be lying there and you'd be performing the last rites on me, and deservedly so if I got hit that hard.
Yeah,
so
if I'm not mistaken, that came on a kickoff return. Yes. And they did not return a kickoff after that.
Correct. Yeah, smart thinking. But yeah, when I think of Proctor and Hooker, I think that I'm not sure if they are overthinking. Like we talked about, because I saw it live and we mentioned on like the videos where you saw Marcus Hooker out of position. I just think if they could go back to a more traditional two deep safety, that it might benefit both of those guys. I'm not sure in what capacity, like if you would want Proctor at free safety and Hooker at stronger, but I'm not here to, we don't have the benefit of going to practice. And here's a news flash for all of our listeners. We don't have the benefit or the experience of coaching at one of the premier football programs in the United States, so, I'm willing to trust Coach Combs in terms of like how and where they're lined up if they do go to that Tampa 2 safety look. But I'm just kind of wondering if some of those kind of adjustments are going to be made. If that's kind of what they're kind of saying, like why don't we go to something that the players can do versus I know that Coach Day would like to play that single high safety, but maybe with no spring practice, the disjointed summer, the completely inexperienced secondary. Maybe they're just kind of ripe for making these mistakes, and we're seeing it now. And I'd rather just kind of admit, hey, why don't we scale it back and make things a little easier for the players, put them in positions to succeed.
Exactly. All right, Chip, let's get into the statistical analysis a little bit. Ohio State's defensive line certainly is the strength of this team, and not necessarily in the pass rush. I don't think the pass rush was. I think there were times that they bothered Penix and they sacked him twice, but I think they need to do a little bit better job getting to the quarterback than they did in this game. But certainly they are stout against the run. Indiana managed a whopping -1 yards rushing. That was in part to a snap over the head of Michael Penix early in the game. But Stevie Scott gained 6 yards on 7 carries, 10 yards for James Sampson, 2 yards for David Ellis, -2 for Penix. This was not a rushing game to write home about for Indiana. On the other side, Ohio State, pretty good day running. I mean, 169 yards, 26 carries for Master Teague, well over the century mark in this one, 2 touchdowns. He broke the long one for 41. Justin Fields had a 30-yard run and ran for 78 total. Trey Sermon had 60 yards rushing, including a 16-yarder. So all 3 of those individuals over 5 yards a carry. Teague and Sermon both over 6 yards a carry. So the running game got going.
And I'm glad you brought up the defensive line, because I think a lot of people are forgetting how much that how it all impacts what we were talking about previously with the secondary. And, this is not meant to disparage Zach Harrison, certainly not meant to disparage Jonathan Cooper, any of the other defensive linemen, but we're spoiled. Ohio State fans have grown accustomed to somebody with the last name of Bosa wearing number 97, over, several seasons. And then after they moved on, Chase Young, and the reason I'm bringing that up is you're talking about a player, regardless of whether they're talking Joey, Nick, or Chase Young, that they were so dominant as a pass rusher that teams would double team, which meant that opened up other defensive linemen to be able to get those sacks. For example, like Sam Hubbard, had a very solid year, when he was lined up on the line, at the opposite end of Nick Bosa.
Right.
And my point is that the defensive linemen, I completely agree with what you said earlier, that they were getting to Penix and they were making things difficult, but there is no Bosa or Chase Young type defensive end. They're rushing the passer, but they're not having the same kind of impact that Ohio State fans have grown accustomed to. That lack of dominant pass rush is manifesting itself in what you see in the secondary. The fact that the quarterback does have more time than they normally would if you had such a dominant pass rusher. And as far as the running game, like we said earlier, I think Master Teague is starting to assert himself. It was very good to see Trey Sermon. It was good to see Justin Fields run for, not just for the sake of, running, like it certainly seemed like last year, like he actually, in this case, to gain positive yards, if, something was covered and, was protecting himself, because that is still an area of concern for Ohio State.
Yeah. It also, just to close the book on the pass rush, doesn't help when you get a strip sack wiped out on a bad call that is then wrongly confirmed by video replay.
I agree. The Big Ten officiating staff across the entire conference did not represent themselves well. Like, what's that? We're complaining about the officiating in the game versus Indiana, and I think somewhere, like, if Purdue head coach Jeff Brom is listening, he's basically yelling, like, to both of us, hold my beer, because he has something he has to say about the last play of the game against Minnesota.
Yeah. All right. So in the passing game, Justin Fields, you talk about his worst day as a Buckeye, 18 of 30, 300 yards, 2 touchdowns, did have 3 interceptions, was sacked 5 times. Michael Penix, 27 of 51. Not a great pass percentage. Only one interception. I thought that the Buckeyes would be able to pick off 2 or 3 of his passes. Michael Penix has a tendency to lose his mechanics a bit in the pocket sometimes and float balls or make decisions where he tries to force something in, and I thought that that would play into Ohio State's hands. To his credit, it did not. He only got baited into the 1 pick 6 for Sean Wade. I thought there was a great analysis on the game too, where Wade lined up off the line, but once he recognized the play, he just ran the route for the receiver and got there first and took it to the house. And I thought that was a pretty good breakdown of that. 491 yards for Penix, 5 touchdowns, sacked twice, really sacked 3 times with a fumble, but who's counting? 491 yards and 5 touchdowns passing against Ohio State's defense. Unacceptable, Chip.
Which the 491 yards is unacceptable?
Yeah, and the 5 touchdowns.
Yeah. I give credit where credit is due. I think Penix played better than certainly you and I anticipated. I agree with you. I thought that turnovers would have been easier to come by. I am also solidly in the camp that the strip sack that wasn't called certainly, could have played a bigger impact if it had been called correctly. I guess if I'm going to, beggars can't be choosers mindset, the fact that they did get a interception and return it for a pick 6, I'll take that one interception that proved to be the conclusive points, in the win. So a lot of things to work on, on the defensive side of the ball, because Penix, I think that was probably why, a lot of Ohio State fans kind of like the gnashing of teeth and the rending of garments, so to speak, after the game, they started thinking, what would, Trevor Lawrence do to this secondary? If Penix can throw for nearly 500 yards and 5 touchdowns, so I'm gonna be in that camp that I think that I have complete confidence in Coach Combs and the other defensive coaches on the staff, like Coach Barnes, Coach Washington, Coach Madison. And I think that they're going to collectively huddle and figure out what they can do to get the defense squared away as, believe it or not, as the calendar gets closer to December. It's so weird to think about, football in December, but since this is such an atypical year for college football, that is what we're going to have to consider the stretch run.
Yep. So let's put a bow on this. Receiving wise, Indiana, Ty Freifogel, 7 catches, 218 yards, 3 touchdowns. Whop Philyor, 6 catches, 56 yards. I was more worried about Whop Philyor and Peyton Hendershot coming into this game than I was Ty Freifogel. Not that I didn't think Freifogel was a good player. I just didn't think that even on the worst day, which this was, that this defense would be able to give up 7 for 218 and 3 scores to Ty Freifogel. On the other side, Chris Olave, 8 catches, 101 yards. Garrett Wilson, 7 for 169 and 2 touchdowns. And then just 3 other catches. So really just those 2 guys. And I don't know if that's a trust issue. I've seen guys open downfield on some of these plays where Fields doesn't throw it, and I don't know if he just doesn't trust them or if they're not running the right routes, but they're open, so I don't care if they're running the right routes if they're open. But, it seems like more guys need to be involved because Ohio State it seemed like they were really hard to defend. Not that they're easy to defend now, but it seemed like they were really a lot harder to defend when you had 6 guys and they were all sharing the ball so that everybody was getting 3 or 4 catches rather than now 2 guys getting, basically all the catches. But both of our picks to click were in there. Olave was mine and Garrett Wilson was yours, and they both clicked.
And I think you might be onto something when you say that it might be a trust issue with Justin Fields as it relates to Garrett Wilson and Chris Olave. I'm certainly pleased that both of our picks to click came through. But yeah, I'm also in that camp of, it would be nice to see some of the other wide receivers and or the tight ends who are in. Even heck, I'm going to throw even some of the running backs as check down options. Like to get some more players involved in the passing game. So it is not. I wonder. We've talked about some of the upcoming opponents. Do they have the personnel to slow down Garrett Wilson or Chris Olave? But by the same token, like I'd feel a lot better if knowing that, oh yeah, he's going to throw it to, fill in the blank who, we see, checked into the game on this series as the third wide receiver. If Justin Fields can kind of develop that chemistry that I think that you're right, that he has with Olave and Wilson.
Yeah, it was very odd not to hear Jeremy Ruckert's name called in the passing game on this particular day. Now, on defense, Chip, I had picked Jonathan Cooper, and early on, he looked like he was going to click all over the place. He had an early sack. He had a couple of, I call them quarterback hurries. Now, officially, on the stat sheet on the Ohio State page, there were no quarterback hurries by Ohio State, which I feel like is wrong, because I feel like even if you don't count the strip sack as a strip sack, I feel like Zach Harrison at least hurried Michael Penix on that play, but he didn't get credit for one. But I thought that it was a good start for Jonathan Cooper, and he did a good job of collapsing his side of the line, but he wasn't really able to disengage with his man the way you'd like to. But what that did was it certainly helped really shut the door on the run game, because they just collapsed the line and there were no yards in there to be had, and Indiana basically gave up on the running game after 7 or 8 carries essentially. So I will not give Jonathan Cooper a click, although I think he was effective in ways that don't show up on the stat sheet. You had Pete Werner, who had 8 total tackles to tie Baron Browning for the lead on the team. And he also had a sack and a tackle for loss and a forced fumble. So I would say Pete Werner clicked like a champion.
Well, I'm going to leave it up to you about Jonathan Cooper. I think I think he is that, if not that dominant performance on the defensive line, I think he is that steadying performance on the defensive line. So I'm going to leave it up to you. As far as Pete Werner, he is, we've mentioned this before, but just to reiterate, that he's one of those guys where, like that love-hate relationship that the fans had. He had that sack you just referenced was basically what ended the game, for Ohio State when Indiana had the ball with very little time remaining. So, Pete Werner is going to be one of these guys that it wouldn't surprise me when he goes to the NFL that he makes a roster and he's just, he's kind of like one of these unsung players, because that's kind of the role he seems to have established for himself at Ohio State.
Couldn't you just see Pete Werner playing for Bill Belichick in New England and just making plays?
Certainly.
At linebacker one play, and at safety the next play, and on special teams. He's that kind of player, I think, and that kind of he could fit that kind of role. But yeah, I mean, I think Cooper played solidly. He played fine. I just don't think he flashed enough for me to officially say he clicked. And I would say the same thing of Tommy Togiai, who had a solid, good game, but I don't think you can give a guy with one tackle a click. I think you need at least a few tackles to click. Otherwise, he did his job, but you got to do more than just your job. You got to put up 100 yards receiving, for example. That's a pretty good way to click. So there you go. It's a win. We'll move on to Illinois. You and I will talk about that in just a little bit. But any other thoughts on Ohio State, Indiana before we turn the page on this one?
Just that Indiana, I think, justified their ranking. I'm sure there were people that were kind of, were wondering how good they really are. I think, if anything, Indiana will be playing in a bowl game. On my belief is Indiana will be playing in a solid bowl game on New Year's Day, which is highly unusual for the Hoosiers. So it's a credit to Tom Allen and that program.
All right, Chip. Well, let's turn the page then. We'll get to our Illinois preview. We'll get to all our other Ohio State news. We'll get to that right after this. All right, Chip, before we get to the Illinois Fighting Illini and everybody's favorite college football trophy, the Illibuck, just a few more things to talk about. Let's talk about the champions. You mentioned you would leave it up to me on Jonathan Cooper, and I decided he didn't click, but Ryan Day decided that yes, Jonathan Cooper clicked because he and Pete Werner, our two picks to click, were the co-players of the game defensively for Ohio State. On offense, Garrett Wilson and Luke Farrell were the co-players of the game, which I was a little surprised. I mean, I didn't think Farrell played poorly. He obviously did what he needed to do. He certainly didn't flash, but he must have done a lot of the little things in this game. But then, I get a little suspect when all 5 offensive linemen graded out as champions, especially when Nicholas Petit-Frere on back-to-back plays had a play where he just decided not to block anybody, and then the next play he had a holding penalty that ended up killing a drive. So, I don't know how all 5 do that, but maybe that's just a solidarity thing. And Master Teague, also a champion in this game. So, I think that offensively, I think I don't necessarily agree with all the champions in this case.
Yeah, they're. It seems like their grading criteria is certainly a lot more. I guess you could just say a lot more casual than you or I would be. But again, I'm going to defer to Coach Day and the coaching staff for how they make these determinations.
Yeah. Not sure how Chris Olave also graded as a champion also. Defensively, Haskell Garrett, Tommy Togiai, Tyreek Smith, Tyler Friday, Zach Harrison, Tuff Borland, Baron Browning, Sean Wade, all graded out as champions. And then, of course, Jonathan Cooper and Pete Werner. Special teams player of the game, Josh Proctor, who killed a guy. And scout team players of the week, Trayvon Wilburn, Zaid Hamdan, Josh Fryer, and Jagger LaRoe. So those are your champions and players of the game for Ohio State this week. Okay, I'm whatever. Any comments from you, Chip, on these? Or you good with them?
I'm good. I like I said, I think it's a lot more casual than I think you or I would be. Mm-hmm. Certainly. I'm nothing against the scout team because they're doing their job, but certainly seems like there's a lot more champions than you or I would certainly dish out.
Mm-hmm. All right, let's take a quick trip around the Big Ten. As it turns out, Maryland had to cancel its game against Michigan State, so luckily Michigan State didn't have to fall to 1-4. That one was, of course, Maryland still dealing with some COVID-19 issues. There were some surprises in this week. You mentioned the end of the Minnesota-Purdue game. Minnesota wins that one 34-31. I know there were some big-time controversy on the offensive pass interference that they called on the tight end for Purdue was ridiculous. I think we all think it's ridiculous. And we're not really sure what that Big Ten official was seeing when he threw that flag. It really wasn't PI. But again, Purdue was still in excellent condition after that was called back, still in field goal range to at least get it to overtime, and Jack Plummer just had a brain cramp on the next pass, and I don't know what he thought he saw on that play, but it was an ill-advised pass, and it was intercepted, and so Purdue falls to 2-2, and Minnesota improves to 2-3.
I just going to speculate here. I think Jeff Brom, his wallet might be a little lighter, but it's certainly justifiable based on that horrendous call that kind of sealed the game. So that's just my opinion.
So while Ohio State and Indiana were playing maybe the de facto game, championship for the Big Ten East, the Big Ten West was under, you know, contest in the West. In the West, Wisconsin at Northwestern, and this one shocked me. 17-7, the Wildcats, the Fighting Reese Davises, defeat, presumed Heisman Trophy winner Graham Mertz, or at least after one game.
Yeah, Graham Mertz is merely mortal, and a credit to Northwestern. I certainly did not see that coming. Then again, I think Paul Chryst certainly did not see all of the turnovers that Wisconsin gave up. And I agree with something that Tom Orr wrote, that this is the kind of team that if Ohio State winds up facing Northwestern, that I certainly would not feel comfortable, because Northwestern, they're gonna bring the game down to their level, and meaning that it's going to be kind of that slugfest. So a lot of football to be played, but congratulations to Northwestern on a surprising and a very tough win.
Indeed, a resurgent Iowa Hawkeyes team goes to Happy Valley and throttles Penn State 41-21. Chip, the Nittany Lions, I don't know if you're aware of this, 0-5 for the first time in the history of the world.
That's what I found out, that this was, the first time ever. So Iowa certainly was in control pretty much the entire game. Penn State, they've got a lot of work to do, considering their next three opponents. I'd say one of them is probably a gimme, but again, who's to say in this wacky year of 2020?
Exactly. I gotta say that in most years, you can't go to Penn State and have your quarterback go 18 of 28 for 186 yards with no touchdowns and win a game, let alone by 20 points. Just doesn't happen.
Yeah, Iowa, whenever Iowa and Penn State get together, it's usually a real close game. But yeah, it's just beyond explanation as to what's happening there, at Penn State. Considering they were, by all accounts, a top 10 team going into the season, and for them to be 0-5, it just boggles the mind.
And after a slow start, the Hawkeyes may be the best team in the West. Well, maybe they're not. Northwestern and Iowa are both playing very well right now. Iowa did not start the season very well, but the Hawkeyes seem to be rolling. So Penn State 0-5, and I don't think James Franklin's going to get fired, but wow, they might take a recruiting hit after a season like this. We'll have to see how it plays out. Let us now go to Lincoln, where the Nebraska Cornhuskers fall to 1-3, and this week's Ohio State opponent, Illinois, improved to 2-3 with a 41-23 road victory over the Huskers. Brandon Peters was 18 of 25, 205 yards, and I cannot say Josh's last name to save my life. Imatter Bebe, 4 receptions, 71 yards, and a touchdown. The Illini coming on.
Well, we're going to talk about Illinois in greater detail. And yeah, you got Imatter Bebe. You got it as well as I'm able to discern. So as far as Nebraska, I think there are a lot of issues. The fact that game was taking place at the same time, Ohio State, Indiana, I didn't have the advantage of watching the entire thing, with the exception of watching like the Big Ten in 60, watching that edition of it. But Illinois was in control the entire time. So Nebraska, there's a lot of things that they need to figure out. It reminded me of, in terms of dominance, it reminded me of a few weeks ago, the beating that Maryland put on Penn State in terms of that kind of a dominant performance.
Worst start to a Nebraska career as head coach for Scott Frost than Mike Riley.
But in fairness to Scott Frost, the team that Mike Riley took over was a little more competitive. Like it's kind of, like it's
Mike Riley did not take over a Mike Riley team, is what you're saying.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, I get it, but I think Nebraska is not going the right direction right now, and I'm not really sure that they look like they're likely to turn that around anytime soon, quite frankly. So we'll have to see how it goes. I think at the end of the day, 2020 is going to be a weird year that is an outlier in a lot of ways anyway. But one thing that's not an outlier is that what you can count on from the Michigan Wolverines, Chip, is that they will find, maybe sometimes multiple times in a year, their quarterback of the future. And they found it in Cade McNamara. Earlier this year, they found their quarterback of the future in Joe Milton. And he is no longer the quarterback of the future for the Michigan Wolverines, as Cade McNamara was a lot more successful in this one as he had been in the previous game. Michigan, Chip, going on the road, you got to love those plucky Wolverines. They are now able to not only compete with Rutgers, but to outlast the Scarlet Knights in triple overtime, and the Wolverines take it 48-42. So that rivalry is alive and well.
And that game seemed like it was never, ever going to end. I know that you're pretty much a stalwart when it comes to the late night Saturday night, but at some point I was like, please let this mercifully come to a conclusion in some way, shape, or form. So as far as Cade McNamara's emergence, we shall see, because the Wolverines are playing against the aforementioned Nittany Lions this weekend. We'll see if he can continue his march towards a Heisman Trophy candidacy, as it seems like all Wolverine quarterbacks are bequeathed by the media prematurely. So we shall see.
Noah Vedral, 29-43, 381 yards and 3 touchdowns against that vaunted Wolverines defense. So, I don't know if Jim Harbaugh survives the night if he loses that game to Rutgers, but he didn't have to worry about it in the end. And what really stuck out to me in this game was the celebration on the sideline, the Michigan sideline, in those overtimes when the Wolverines made plays, like when they scored, when Rutgers missed what would have been the winning field goal in the first overtime. The celebration is like, wow. I mean, Jim Harbaugh looked like he had just won the Super Bowl.
Well, it's just amazing how far the standards have fallen. In terms of, like you said, it's like you're talking about a program that routinely toyed with Rutgers. Now that they are jumping up and down, like you said, almost as though that they had won the Super Bowl. So a lot of football to be played up in Ann Arbor. I'm not entirely confident things are going to necessarily that they're out of the woods yet. But I think we talked about it before. I think Rutgers is certainly showing that they are no longer content to be everyone's doormat within the Big Ten East.
Well, Michigan looks to be getting a lot more comfortable with that. And certainly Penn State looks like it's getting a lot more comfortable with becoming the doormat in the East at 0-5. Chip, the Illini and Ohio State, they will play at noon on Saturday. In fact, all of Ohio State's remaining games in the regular season are at noon. That was announced this week.
And personally, that's a good thing. Maybe I'm. I realize this is such a strange year where there's no tailgating and things like that. But to me, there's something nice about knowing that for the remaining 3 games, as you said, at Illinois, at Michigan State, and the home finale against the Wolverines, knowing at noon, get to watch. And then get to enjoy the remainder of what games that are on at like 3:30 and 7 o'clock and so forth.
Indeed. All right, Illinois, Chip. What do the Illini do well? What do the Illini not do well? I know that they don't pass the ball well. The Illini are ranked 113th in the country in passing offense. What do the Buckeyes need to watch out for? And I think that plays into Ohio State's hands, that they're that poor of a passing offense. What do they do well? What do the Buckeyes need to worry about on defense this week? What's going to keep Kerry Combs up at night?
Well, the big wide receiver that you and I both struggled to say his name, Josh Imatorbhebhe, is going to certainly be. He had a couple touchdowns against Nebraska, or excuse me, I think he had. I know he had at least one touchdown, and he, in terms of, he's definitely going to pose a major concern. Even though Illinois doesn't throw the ball well, he's their biggest threat, at the wide receiver position. What I would say that I saw against Nebraska that they did well is Illinois are committed to running the ball consistently, through kind of a committee approach. I mean, I was really impressed with Chase Brown, who, just kind of like this, he's kind of a, spark plug, feisty runner, not anything, he's not going to necessarily run you over or run past you, but he's going to run determined every time. Between Chase Brown and Mike Epstein, kind of a committee approach to running the ball. I think that's what Ohio State defensively has to be concerned about. If they can shut down Illinois' running game, then we'll hopefully have the kind of game that we've all been hoping for, where we get to see some of those backups for the second half. But that right. Has to be first and foremost.
Right, and I agree with you. I think that this is going to be a good barometer, I think, for how good Ohio State's run defense really is. Obviously, they did very well against Indiana, but Indiana had other things they could do to hurt you. I don't expect Illinois to hurt Ohio State in the passing game very much. They might hit a play or two, but the bottom line is the run game, and everybody's running the ball, like you said. Isaiah Williams and Brandon Peters, two quarterbacks, both averaging over 6 yards a carry. Mike Epstein over 6 yards a carry. Chase Brown almost 6 yards a carry. Those are the main guys that have done it this year. They're running for 220 plus yards a game, 20th in the country in rushing offense. So really, that's what it comes down to. Is I think this is a strength against strength situation when Ohio State's defense is on the field against Illinois' offense, and that becomes even more important when you consider the end of November in the wind tunnel in Champaign.
I took the liberty of looking up the weather forecast for Champaign on Saturday, and right now, as we record it, it's supposed to be a sunny day, high of maybe 47 degrees. You and I both know that, as you aptly described, the wind tunnel, that, the forecast as we're recording that, by the time Saturday comes around, could be completely different. So I think it's going to not only be incumbent upon Ohio State to shut down the Illinois running game, but be able to establish the Ohio State running game. Because, as you said, it's a completely different animal out there in Champaign with, as you said, the wind tunnel.
Yeah, I mean, even if all across the Midwest it was clear, still 75 degrees and sunny, it would be minus 26 with the wind chill in Champaign, Illinois. That's just the way it works.
You're probably right.
I think it's a pocket universe or a pocket dimension. Much like Purdue, much like West Lafayette, it's just some weird quirk, that like it was like the bottomless hole in Springfield in the softball episode of The Simpsons. Just some weird quirk of nature that doesn't exist anywhere else. That's what I think. I think that that's what Champaign is, and Ohio State will have to, combat that. When Ohio State is on offense and Illinois is on defense, this is an Illinois defense that, Chip, they are ranked 94th against the run nationally. Now, again, a lot fewer games than some of the other teams, but 194 yards a game that they are giving up. And that really bodes well for an Ohio State run game that has started to move the football, started against Indiana to get some success, hit some home runs, hit some longer runs, and be able to sustain drives and keep ahead of the chains with Master Teague.
I agree that when watching Nebraska against Illinois, that was where they had successes, when they were running the ball, regardless of whether it was with Luke McCaffrey. Sometimes they had Wan'Dale Robinson, that they were effective. Where Nebraska, what led to their demise was a lot of turnovers and just, poor play. But you're completely right. I think this is a game for Ohio State to assert the running game with Master Teague, with Trey Sermon. I'm willing to throw in, even the backups if they can get the running game going and get the backup running backs some playing time, so be it. But I certainly think take advantage of the Illinois deficiencies in the run defense and get that running game well established as you head into December.
So are you going out on a limb and saying Marcus Crowley is your pick to click?
I'm not going out on that.
All right. So
I'm happy to see that he was not on that list of unable to perform or unable to play.
He's off the inactive list. However, this is a road game, so they won't be taking as many players with them. So they'll probably only take, I'm guessing, 3 running backs on the road with them, and that 2 of those are going to be Teague and Sermon. I'm going to guess Steele Chambers would be the 3rd there. So that's probably what we're looking at in terms of a road game. Maybe there'll be a 4th. I don't know how those decisions are made. But just for comparison, we want to think about Illinois on defense against the run. Like I said, they're 94th. Indiana, and this is after the Ohio State game, Indiana is 55th, giving up 45 fewer yards per game on the ground. And again, that's after the explosion that Ohio State had on Indiana. So this is an Illinois defense that I would expect Ohio State can run against. But if the Illini, if it's a windy day, the Illini pack the box, you never know. They might be able to have some success.
Yeah, I mean, it could be a slugfest. I do think Ohio State certainly has the talent. I think this is the kind of game Illinois, they're going to pull out all the stops, because why not? This is probably like the biggest home game that Illinois has had, since Ohio State and Illinois do not play every year. I mean, I think this is the first time since 2017, if I'm not mistaken. So why not? If you're Illinois, do everything you possibly can to pull off the upset. I know other people have been circling this game as kind of a trap game for Ohio State, especially the way Ohio State's played in the second half of games this season.
Well, with the Illini and Michigan State back-to-back and not being very good teams, I don't see this as a trap the way I might have at one time, because you don't expect a big fight from Michigan State necessarily, and Michigan being what they are, I don't think Ohio State will take them lightly because they're their rivals, but they haven't been as good. So I think with all that's gone wrong for Ohio State, I think they're going to worry more about Ohio State and fixing the problems, and I think that will keep this from being a trap game, but we'll see how it plays out. Now, as far as the passing game is concerned, Illinois against the pass defensively, still not great, only 84th in the country, giving up 252 yards a game. So this is a defense that has been pretty much a shambles for Lovie Smith.
Yeah, maybe it was just because they were playing Nebraska that they looked much more imposing. I think if anything, we were talking about some of the different players on Illinois' defense that kind of caught my eye. Talking about the Ohio State offensive line earlier, the player to keep an eye out, number 99, the defensive end by the name of Owen Carney Jr. had 2 sacks against Nebraska. So, in terms of a pass rush, he would probably be, somebody that I'm not sure where he will necessarily line up, but regardless of whether you're talking Petit Frere or Munford, making sure that they account for where Owen Carney Jr. lines up on the defensive line.
Yeah, so that's, that the Illini, they have no real business being in this game, but the way Ohio State has played, you can almost script it, Chip. You can almost script Ohio State taking a big lead into the half and then Illinois chipping away at that lead in the second half. It's kind of been the trend this year.
Which is rather disconcerting.
It is, if you don't hold on to that lead. And you expect like an Alabama or a Clemson or maybe a Notre Dame to be able to have enough to overcome that in the second half, or maybe even keep the first half close so that second half is a bigger problem. But we haven't been in that situation, and we don't really know if this is because there's not the crowds, they're not staying engaged mentally. It's very curious because some of these other teams have been playing in front of fans in the South, so they haven't taken their foot off the gas.
That's a really good point. And Illinois, unlike Ohio Stadium, they're going to actually allow the players' families in the stands on Saturday, which, again, not nearly to the extent of what you would hope for, in a typical college football game, but maybe that might help with the fan atmosphere, for the energy level that we were talking about earlier.
All right, Chip, who else for the Illini should Ohio State fans be aware of this week?
Well, we talked about Ahmad Bebe at wide receiver. Another wide receiver who's, I'll just say that is kind of, if you want to classify him from my perception, as a possession guy, number 86, Daniel Navarro, was, he had some big moments, as well as at tight end, Daniel Barker, number 87. So these are the guys that Brandon Peters, is going to look for if they can't get that running game going. I think Peters is I think you hit it right on the head. They have done nothing really to truly distinguish themselves, but Navarro, Barker are players that Ohio State, the defense needs to account for besides Ahmad Bebe.
Yeah, absolutely. All right, so it comes to the point in the game, or the point in our podcast anyway, Chip, that we need to put it all out there, make our predictions, and get our picks to click. And by the way, Nebraska ended up putting up a little over 400 yards, I think, of offense against Illinois. So even though they didn't, they only scored 23 points, they were able to move the ball in the Illini. So I think that really bodes well for Ohio State's offense. I think that they'll be able to move the ball on the ground and in the air when they need to. I think we'll see maybe some new wrinkles this week as we start to get closer to the Michigan game, to give the Wolverines a little something else to look at and study on film. This is one of those games where maybe in the past you might see that weird onside kick like we saw against Maryland, and something along those lines from Ryan Day. What do you think about that? You think something crazy is going to happen this week?
I wouldn't put it past them. I think this also might be the kind of game where they hopefully, they get that running game going as I know I certainly have been hoping that they do, and just kind of stick with it. I feel more and more comfortable going into December knowing that Ohio State can run the ball not only when they want to, but also when the opposing defense knows that it's coming and they can't stop it. To me, that's kind of been a trademark of Ohio State offenses. So yeah, I wouldn't put it past Ryan Day to kind of show some new wrinkles, to kind of make the upcoming opponents, give them a few more sleepless moments.
Yeah, something to keep in mind: the Illini are 10th in the nation, surprisingly, in turnover margin. So they're getting they're plus 1.2 per game. That's just a little bit better than Ohio State, which is plus 1 per game. So, maybe some turnovers could keep this game closer for a while. But I expect that in the end, Ohio State will take care of business. I think that this is a team that's got to be really angry at the way that it's performed so far, really searching for answers. And I think this is one of those games where it would be the game after Urban Meyer had a public, we're going to get this fixed kind of, promise in his post-game press conference.
Well, I know that Ryan Day isn't happy, which means that will manifest itself on the practice field this week. if anything, considering it's Thanksgiving, I think the players are going to be thankful to take out their aggression on the Fighting Illini, after facing the wrath of their coach and the coaching staff. But yeah, I certainly agree that I think that the players can't be happy. I know Justin Fields wasn't happy with his performance, and I think we'll see, like you said, some of those angry results manifest themselves on the field on Saturday.
All right, let's get to our picks to click. Chip, you're going to start on defense today, and what do you got?
Well, this might be going on a limb because he had his moments, not all necessarily bad against Indiana, not all necessarily good, but I'm going to go with Shaun Wade. I'm going to go with the mindset of he's going to be one of those players who wants to show that he's better than he's performed. I think he's going to do a job on Ahmad Bebe. So that's my pick to click defensively.
All right, I think Illinois is going to try to run the ball. They've been successful at it. I'm going to think that this is a game where Tough Borland can really pad his stats. I'm going to go with Tough Borland to click this week. That will bring us to the offensive side of the ball. Chip, what are you thinking against the Illini? You going run game? You going pass game? Where do you see this one? Who's your pick on this side of the ball?
Well, I apologize in advance if I've stolen your guy that you were going to go with, but as I said, I think this is truly going to be a running game feature, and so I'm going to go with Master Teague.
Okay, Master Teague locking you in. And I'm going to say that here's a player I think has been playing better of late. And maybe he's the beneficiary of Master Teague wearing them out. But I'm going to go with Trey Sermon to have his best game of the season.
Okay.
I think maybe he can get to the century mark. Master Teague comes in and wears them down. And I think that this... maybe it's going to start happening. I think it maybe against Indiana it started to happen where these guys are a little more comfortable sharing carries because it didn't seem like there was, necessarily big drop-offs. There were certainly some differences in the play calling when Trey Sermon was in the game, but I think maybe they're getting a little bit more comfortable and more set in their roles by this time of the season. So we'll see if it plays out against Illinois.
I like it.
All right, Chip, it's prediction time. Score prediction from you, my friend.
Well, I was impressed by what like the scrappiness that Illinois displayed not only against Nebraska, but previously against Rutgers. And I'm being completely sincere when I say that, the fact that Rutgers, that tenacity style, I think Illinois has a little of that. I think Ohio State's going to get that big lead, and I also believe that they're going to use that running game to just kind of control the clock. So I'm going to go Ohio State 56, Illinois 20.
Okay, you're going high scoring game in this one. 56-20 Ohio State. I'm assuming you're picking them, right?
Yes.
I'm going to go a little bit lower. I'm going to go 41 to 23, which reminds me, actually, we didn't talk about our score predictions from the Indiana game. You had 31-17, and I had 44-27, so I think I win this one.
Certainly.
So I was very close on the Ohio State score, and I was higher on the Indiana score. So I will take that victory where I can get it, Chip.
Absolutely. I would never begrudge that.
All right. If you want to ask myself or Chip a question here on the Silver Bullets podcast, well, we'd love to have you. All you need to do is hit us up on Twitter. He is at Chip Minnich. Minnich is how you spell his last name. So at Chip Minnich or at Mike36Fan or both of us, and ask your question, and we'll answer it on the Silver Bullets podcast. No questions this week, Chip, which is probably good because we're running longer than we should, and we didn't even have a guest this week because I had a little procedure on Monday. Didn't know if I was even going to be able to be in the mood to record tonight, so I turned out I was fine and good to go, but I wasn't going to assume. So I waited too long to get somebody, and then they weren't available on short notice. But I do appreciate the Champagne Room for answering my request and getting back to me. And we'll catch up another time, perhaps. But it's becoming a little bit of a habit. I need to get on the Michigan State blogs pretty early, and the Michigan blogs, and we can and get those guys scheduled so that we have guests in the future. But I don't really have anything else to discuss unless you do.
No, I just want to wish you and all of our listeners a very safe and happy Thanksgiving. Mm-hmm. As we're recording this, it's prior to Thanksgiving. I know that it's been a challenging year in many respects for people all across the country and all around the world. But I sincerely hope everyone has something that they can find to be thankful for. I certainly do. So best wishes to you, best wishes to everyone for a safe and happy Thanksgiving, and hope everyone enjoys the Ohio State-Illinois game on Saturday. Should be a good one.
That's a great call by you, Chip. And I would add that, if you can this year, keep your gathering as small as you can, or at least, limit it to people who are being safe, or as safe as possible in these very, very trying times with the pandemic going on. The worst thing is that you have this one great day and then it becomes a tragedy down the road. You don't want that. Nobody wants that. So I'm just asking everybody out there to be smart. Even if you think this is a big hoax, let's just pretend it's not a hoax for a day. And what's the worst that can happen? Everybody lives. Everybody survives.
I completely agree.
And then you could do it all again next year. All right, that's going to do it. That'll put a bow on this episode of the Silver Bullets podcast. Chip, where can people find you on this series of tubes and wires that we call the interwebs?
Well, as you said, I can be found on Twitter at Chip Minnich. As Michael said, my last name is spelled Minnich. Besides this podcast, I'm also a contributor to Athlon Sports. So look for an article previewing the Ohio State-Illinois game to be dropped by Athlon Sports later this week. Obviously, my final score prediction, but you get an idea in terms of some of the things when Illinois has the ball, besides when Ohio State has the ball, that kind of thing.
Yeah, and if you are not sure how to spell Chip's first name, look at the bag you're holding right now. And
very good point.
That's how you spell Chip. And you can find me on Twitter at Mike36Fan. And you can find me on Buckeye Scoop. I am the grumpy old Buckeye. My column drops every Sunday. It's all the things that really grind my gears about that week's game. Mostly it's tongue-in-cheek. I'm not a really angry dude. I'm not really as grumpy as I would maybe have you believe. And, sometimes when you win a game by 5 touchdowns and you write 1,000 words on how everything made you mad, you're not really that mad. That's all I'm saying.
Good point.
So that will do it. We ask that you please visit us and on iTunes and leave us a star rating and a review if you would. That'd be great. We can get seen by more people. We can get in more searches.
Very, very appreciated.
That's going to do it. We will be back next week, Chip and I, to discuss Ohio State's trip to the wind tunnel in Illinois, see how that wind tunnel testing went, make sure all the lines are sleek and that we don't have any drag. And, I'll check all the coefficients. I don't know all the terminology, Chip. I'm just throwing stuff out there. I'm
believing what you're saying.
But we will also preview Michigan State. And, it's weird this time of year. We're usually gearing up for the team up north instead of the team, one of the several teams to the west. But that's the way it is. Let's go get us a wooden turtle this week, shall we?
I'm complete agreement.
All right. The Illibuck, the greatest trophy in all of sports, is up for grabs on Saturday, and we'll be here to talk about it next week. Until then, everybody, go Bucks.
Go Bucks.
Oh, and listen to all the other Buckeye Scoop podcasts.